of Waynesboro City Council. I'd like to welcome everyone. Mr. Short is celebrating Heather's 29th and holding birthday tonight and will not be joining us this evening. Mr. Lee, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. And for those in attendance this evening, if you wish to speak during a public hearing or citizens' comment period, please sign up in the sheet in the back of chambers. Item 3 is adoption of the meeting agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes 4-0. Item 4 is matters from mayor. I don't have anything this evening, so we'll move on to item 5, matters from council.
I attended the ribbon cutting at T-Mobile, their new their new old location, I guess, the remodeled location down in front of the Amazon building. Great location. They've done a lot of work on there, spiffing it up and making it look good, and they're doing a lot of good business in there. Really nice folks. So I wish them the most success possible.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Wood, anybody else? No? Okay. Item 6 is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes 4-0. Moving right along, item 7 is a presentation from Dr. Kimberly McClanahan, Executive Director for the Valley Community Services Board, regarding possibly establishing a crisis receiving center for the Stanton, Augusta County, and Waynesboro area. Dr. McClanahan.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. Really appreciate that. And I also wanted to thank you for your contribution to us from your budget this year. We really appreciate the 10% match that you all have graciously provided for the last several years. So I'm going to see if this works. Yay. So just a little bit, because some of you may not know a lot about Valley. And so we're your friendly neighborhood, publicly funded behavioral health organization. We serve Augusta and Highland counties, Waynesboro and Stanton. Established in 1971, so we're 52 years old at this point. And we, CSBs in general, community service boards, are the single point of entry into publicly funded mental health, developmental and substance use disorder services. And if you don't know, there are 40 CSBs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, divided into 5 regions. We're Region 1. We are in Region 1 with 8 other CSBs. I won't go through them. You can read those. We are considered to be a rural CSB with a medium-sized budget at approximately $22 to $24 million. Our approved FY24 budget is right at $24 million. So our mission is to provide community-based behavioral health, developmental disability, and substance use services to the folks that I just mentioned. And in FY22, we served 5,689 people from our catchment area, almost 1,000 from across the state of Virginia. So a total number of clients was 6,500 essentially. And 1,400 of those were residents of Waynesboro. So, you know, mental health people, if you're not familiar with us, we love acronyms. So I'm going to do just a quick acronym thing. So we're going to be talking about the first 2 there mostly, a crisis receiving center, crisis stabilization detox unit. So CRC and CSUD. You probably have all heard of ECOs, emergency custody orders, and TDOs, temporary detention orders. ED, the emergency department. LEOs, our law enforcement officers. We're not really going to talk about our CTAC stuff. We're VCSB, and DBHTS is the department who is kind of in charge of us, I guess. So they are our partners and oversee the work that the CSBs do in the Commonwealth. So, a CRC, 23-hour intervention observation program, and that's used to help somebody come in. They can be in a chair, they can calm down, they can get food and sustenance, and hopefully they're going to calm to the point within those 23 hours and 59 minutes to where they can go back into the community and not have to go to the ED or to the hospital. So the CSU, a crisis stay unit, is short-term, generally 5 to 7 days, but if you can get Medicaid to pay for it, it could be up to 15 days. And the client can become stabilized through assessment and treatment and medication. It can be a step up from the CRC, or potentially a step down from hospitalization. So that's what we're pretty much talking about tonight. VCSB received a bit of money towards a CRC this year, and we'll talk a little bit about that. $1 million in ARPA funds, which is about $29 million short of what we need to do the whole thing. So for us, it's, what's missing? We've got these things. We've got the emergency department, the hospital. What's missing? Well, obviously, a CRC CSUD. So what we're hoping to do is to do 16 beds of each. So 16 CSU beds, detox beds. There'll be flex beds that could take either mental health or co-occurring or substance-using folks. And there will be a dedicated drop-off space for first responders. We will be able to accept temporary detention orders. We hope that we would also, that CRC would have 16 observation chairs. That's for the 23 hours where they could be located in the combined space, but it's a separate space in the same building. And when you have one of these, according to the model, you should be able to have the capacity to perform medical clearance in most instances. So there's still going to be instances where people need to go to the emergency room, where we are, even though we will have medical help, there are some things that we would not be able to do. And of course, there would be space for other services. So, way back in 2018, Augusta Health spearheaded a big study about the need for a crisis stabilization unit. They weren't talking the 23-hour observation at that point, particularly, although that did come up in the actual final report. So everybody loved the idea in 2018. I was not here, so I'm only going on hearsay. But it didn't happen. And y'all can guess why. Money, right? So here's just a little bit about what is expected if we're going to do this. So we need to accept all referrals. We don't need medical clearance. Services should address mental health and substance use issues. We should have the capacity to assess physical health for minor challenges, and we should be able to offer walk-in and first responder drop-off options. So it would actually be a Sally port where the officers could come drop off their folks, go about their business instead of sitting in the emergency department for 3, 4, 5 days, as they are now. A little bit more, it's staffed at all times, 24/7, 365, and with a no rejection policy for first responders, and of course we would be screening for suicide, violence, all of those things. So, just a little bit more, we're almost to what's happened since I talked to community stakeholders in March, but in 2022, the Community Health Needs Assessment that Augusta Health does every couple of years, prioritization of health needs, 95 community stakeholders, mental health number 1, substance abuse number 5. So pretty serious stuff. And if you look at the statistics, in our area, our suicides are almost double United States and Virginia. We do not kill ourselves with drug-induced death as much as other people, but our deaths associated with cirrhosis and liver disease is higher than the United States or Virginia. Adults currently receiving help is clearly larger than the United States. Adults diagnosed with depression, we're almost at 30%, and that's quite a bit higher than other places. Difficulty or delay in obtaining health care in our area, about 46% of folks say that's a problem, and should become no surprise that transportation is a huge issue, and of course stigma associated with mental health care, lack of understanding about how to get to services, lack of services, and of course access specifically for vulnerable populations. So obviously if we're at the ED in the hospital, we've got higher potential for somebody to go to jail as opposed to get the help that they may need. EDs are crowded. I'm sure y'all have heard a lot of conversation about what's happening at Augusta Health ED at this point in terms of having TDOs there for days and days because there's no room at the inn, so to speak, the hospitals. So our law enforcement officers are spending their time in EDs rather than performing the jobs for which they're trained. And in an ED, there usually aren't a bunch of psychiatrists or people who are going to provide mental health treatment, so treatment is really limited. Do they work? Do these things work? Yes, they do. Studies as far back as 1989 suggest that they work, they save money, and provide a lot of needed treatment to acutely psychiatrically ill individuals. In Virginia, again, research strongly suggests that a significant number of criminal justice and emergency department diversions can take place if we actually have a crisis receiving center. And aside from funding, there are a few roadblocks to making this type of critical service available to a great number of residents of Virginia. Let me just say, if you have any questions, as I'm trying to be quick, but if you have any questions as I'm going along, just jump in and ask. Okay, so these are the crisis stabilization centers nearest to us. The nearest one is Harrisonburg, Rockingham, 7 beds. Very hard to get anybody ever in there. And then you see we go farther and farther and farther across the Commonwealth. Who benefits? Well, obviously, first and foremost, our citizens in need. VCSB completed 742 TDOs in FY22. That's about 61 a month. So we were assessing folks with mental health, substance use, or co-occurring disorders to need some kind of hospitalization, 61 per month. That's quite a bit. And we think a significant amount of those would have been appropriately served in a CRC CSU. The national research suggests 60% to 70% that you can actually do in that, you consider it an outpatient setting essentially, as opposed to having to go to the ED and having to go to the hospital. Others who benefit, obviously law enforcement. Augusta Health would benefit. They can return to using most of the resources for what the ED is there for, which are physical health and emergencies, and the economy would actually be boosted because it will create about 100 jobs for the area when it happens, and those will not be minimum wage jobs. Those will be professionals and be really good. Now, everybody also probably knows that workforce is a major issue, so we need to put people in those jobs, but we would hope to do that. So I presented this first part that I just went through with you guys and more to folks from each of the localities back in March. And at that point, we had, VCSB had $1 million to stand up this CRC. And we're like, okay. But what happened since then is that DBHDS sent a call out for proposals for CSBs who wanted to stand up CRCs and CSUDs. So we sent a proposal asking for funds for both. It was submitted June 15th. We don't know the outcome, at least in part because there's no governor's budget that's been signed yet. So there's quite a bit of money in his budget that would go towards these kinds of things if it ever gets signed. So if approved, architects familiar with these types of projects estimate a 24-month turnaround time before opening, and I'll speak to that really at the end. So we sent in a 27-page proposal with our costs included, and that's, I must say, thanks to our Augusta Health partners. Their business team came and worked steadily and hard with us to come up with these numbers. Capital costs, so we're talking building from the ground up, a 25,000 square foot building, which would house the 16-bed CSU, the 16-chair CRC, and it would also, of course, all the things that go around, along with that, a commercial kitchen, laundry, and also space for a mobile crisis, for Marcus Alert, which of course, Augusta County will have to implement in 2026, and our emergency services would probably go there. And the total personnel cost, now we're talking about if we actually open the doors with 26 staff for both of these, and obviously we're not going to open the doors with 26 staff. I'd love to, but I don't think that's going to happen. And approximately $1 to $1.5 million in additional operating expenses. And so, and that's just adding the security, which is really not a part of the number, the money number that we're talking about. And the same thing there. So this comes from Augusta Health specifically, and they're talking about over a 5-year period that an incremental volume of days that we would have the beds filled. And so that goes incrementally up over those 5 years, and CRC days, CSUD days, and then total there, the third line. And I will say that their estimates were very conservative, and I'll speak to that in a minute. And you look at the total operating expenses, or the income loss from operations, and you see years 3, 4, and 5 with a little bit of a loss. But one of the things that isn't in there are that $750,000 from year 1 and year 2, we would hope we would continue to get from the department in years 3, 4, and 5, which would make us be breaking even or making a little money. And like I said, it's a very, very conservative. So they base their volume assumptions upon their calculations of emergency department visits that would be appropriate for a CRC CSU. And those are the numbers they came up with. And conservatively, they only use 40% of those visits to calculate the potential volume. We're not going to go through all that, but they said, average length of stay in a CRC is 23 hours. We're going to see how many folks we think are from Augusta Health are going to be there. We're going to see how many people that we think are going to come from not Augusta Health, and that's how they came up with those incremental numbers on the CRC. Exactly the same thing on the CSU, only average length of stay of 5 days. So, funding sources, like I've said, currently we have $1 million from DBHDS through ARPA funds. We also have $1.5 million from DBHDS allocated in state general funds for this fiscal year, 24. We have submitted a Department of Justice grant for $550,000. Our locality match funds came to $684,722 for FY24. We're working on a 501c3, which obviously can be used for fundraising in the future. We're looking for additional grants. I guess there's potential for congressionally directed spending in FY25. I missed that whole thing this past year. And we're hoping for full funding, or mostly full funding, from the department in response to our grant proposal. VCSB, our board, has committed $1.5 million over 5 years for operating expenses, and we don't know if any opioid abatement funds may end up being used towards that or not. So that's kind of where we're at. I will say that the department is very, very interested in and wants us to build this. They very much want us to build the CRC CSU. This is one of their priority areas right here in the valley. And so we're even talking today about different square footage so that they could come up with an amount of money that they might be willing to give us. I'm hoping that's going to be a really good amount, but we don't know the answer to that yet, what it's going to be. But I am 95% certain that we will be funded to whatever degree they are able. They will only, when there's a budget, they will only get $90 million for these kinds of projects. So they're probably not going to give us 30, which we'd like, because that only doesn't leave much for anybody else. But I'd love to see 20, would be lovely. But with that all being said, and that's wonderful, and 2 years from now, we can have it up and running if we got the money tomorrow. But, what we heard at the March meeting was that our law enforcement needs help long before 2025. And we started out, and we talked about maybe putting up modular units and doing a truncated version of it, and ended up getting an architect to look at that. It was going to cost $4 million and 2 years anyway. So that didn't make any sense at the end of the day. So what we're hoping to do, and we're going to be talking with Sheriff Smith here this next week, is to actually have some relief at our main office in Stanton. We have emergency services there. We have the ability to do an actual assessment center for the pre-screenings. And what I heard from when I presented this last week was that anything would help. A little bit would help. So if we could do 2 or 3 a day, we can do probably 3 at a time doing the assessments. So anything can help. And so that's kind of where we're at. In terms of the, when I sent the proposal in, we had, well, obviously barriers, money, staff. We got lots of letters of support from our delegates and senators, and from all of our localities. And I'm done.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. McClanahan?
Yeah, do y'all have a location? Did I miss that, or was there a location mentioned?
I did not mention a location. We are looking at property within 5 minutes of Augusta Health, because that's, when we do need to do transfers to there or from there, we want to be very close. They also have agreed to do our labs for us for the beginning, maybe forever, so we want to be able to get those there. So we're looking at property right around there. We don't have anything secured at this point. We do have Bill Hosrath is helping us look. You may know him from the Wayne Theater. But we're very actively pursuing looking at property.
The cost on building, did that include
Yes.
an estimate for property?
Yeah.
The other question, the stats you showed early on, your region is Highland, Augusta, Stanton, and Waynesboro. Was those statistics that were this area, you said it was this area, was that from those specific areas?
Yes.
And do you have stats from just specifically Waynesboro, of what Waynesboro contributes to that as far as patient care?
I don't. You're talking about the community health needs
Yeah, how
assessment?
it breaks down with inside your region.
I don't, but it's possible, I would assume Augusta Health does.
Okay.
And that something I could pursue to see if we
I'd be
could get
curious to
specifics.
see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just from my own curiosity.
No, it's a good question.
Thank
I wish I had a better answer.
you. No, you're fine. You did a great presentation. Thank you.
Any other questions?
How do you come up with the number of beds? How do you get that figure?
Really based on sort of the volume of ECOs and TDOs that Valley does, and we do a lot of them. So we visited one in Highland that's in, I can't think of, Abingdon, Virginia, and it was about 12,000 square feet. They had 10 beds, and it just will not accommodate in the long run what we would need. Just because it really is based on, we have a pretty high acuity rate. When you're thinking about almost 1,000 TDOs in a year, that's a lot. So it wasn't a completely mathematical thing, but we also looked at the larger ones in Northern Virginia and those sorts of things, and that's kind of where we landed. Again, sort of in the middle, like we are with everything.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
No action required tonight. This was for informational purposes only. Item 8 is to receive a report from a representative of the Waynesboro Area Refuge Ministry, WARM, regarding their operations in the upcoming year. Mr. Brian Edwards.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council, Mr. Hampton City staff. For the record, I'm Brian Edwards. I'm the acting executive director and board chair for the Waynesboro Area Refuge Ministry. I believe it's been a while since we've come before you to report on what we've been doing for the unsheltered community here in Waynesboro. Definitely in the last year, since the pandemic officially ended, we have shifted our concentration from emergency shelters at local hotels back to our cold weather shelter, which operates seasonally throughout the cold weather months. We have been working very closely with Ms. Tate and the Community Development Department of the City of Waynesboro. What we're looking at for this next year, really twofold. We have two ministries, the Ruth Van Cleve Anderson House, which is located in the cul-de-sac of Fairfax Avenue. We have had, that's kind of been our bricks and mortar facility. It has been there for approximately 11 years. And it is our center for unsheltered mothers and their children. We have been very fortunate to acquire the administrative offices for the Ark of the Augusta, which has kind of moved from the facility next door. So we've moved our administrative offices into that building, which has allowed us an additional room to house a mother and their children. While that is exciting for us, we realize that there are some steps we have to take through the city. So we've been looking at, with the planning department, to update our use permit. But we're excited that we can hopefully in the next few months allow another mother and their children to move in. Presently, we are serving 5 families at the house, 5 mothers and 7 children. So, and again, it's one of our most enjoyable ministries that we're able to just have all that kind of life going on at the Anderson House. The other excitement that we have is that through a grant through the Community Foundation of the Central Blue Ridge, we have been able to expand our cold weather ministry. For probably 8 years before the pandemic shut us down, it was operating as a rotating shelter through area partner churches. And so when we were able to start back up in the fall, we had a total of 35 beds. And I know that the cold weather shelter, at least in my experience through the police department, was a resource that patrol officers could use to take someone who was in distress to, maybe just needing housing for the evening, to a place where they could find shelter for the find shelter. We're a low barrier shelter. We would take people in regardless of criminal histories, regardless of, if they were, even if they were impaired by some kind of drug, we would take them in. That was important so that they would not end up in the emergency department or at Middle River Jail. And just complimenting what Dr. McClanahan said, as a former first responder, I know that having that additional resource to take someone who is unsheltered and in a crisis helps to have that place where they can go at least for that time. So with that grant, we are looking to enhance our cold weather shelter from 35 beds to 70 beds. That is a major undertaking for us. Sometimes finding facilities to do 35 beds was a bit much, but we were able to accommodate those individuals. I'm here with Hunter McMillan, our outreach director, who has been working ever since our cold weather shelter ended this last season in Easter Sunday, that he has been working to make sure that we can accommodate those folks. And essentially, we are just trying to make sure that when the cold weather season starts in November, that we have enough resources available for folks to come. And again, we are providing them with a warm place, a bed, meals, and if they need sort of outreach services, we can provide that as well. We have a lot of partners in the community. The city of Waynesboro provides us with resources through the Community Development Block Grant, which has all been very helpful for us. But that's basically, we have some needs to grow and have more beds at certain Waynesboro churches and utilize Augusta County churches and Stanton churches. But we just wanted to make council aware of what our robust ministries have been going on. So I will, again, take any kind of questions or answers that you may have,
Any questions for Mr. Upworth? No? No. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your serving in this capacity. Okay, moving on. No action required tonight. That was just for informational purposes. Item 9 is to hold a public hearing and consider adopting an ordinance granting a conditional use permit for temporary special events in the RG5 General Residential District at 1169 Sherwood Avenue, Waynesboro, Virginia. Ms. Tate.
Okay. So council has previously received a presentation on this request, but I will review it not only for the benefit of council, but also the citizens that may be here for the public hearing. So just to recap, conditional use permits allow for a case-by-case review of uses which may be but are not always compatible with the neighboring uses. In order to approve the conditional use permit, council should find that the use is consistent with good zoning practice, that the use is no more adverse to health, safety, or comfort of persons living or working in the area than the use is generally permitted in that district, and that the use is no more detrimental economically or otherwise to property or improvements in the area than uses generally permitted in the district. The location of this specific request is at the corner of Hopeman Parkway and Sherwood Avenue, and it's just north of South Fork Drive. So the nature of the request is to permit a temporary special event use in the RG5 or General Residential District. The applicant would like to host small events such as fundraisers, weddings, bridal or baby showers, conference or team building events, and other workshops. The property has been used as a bed and breakfast, and the owners would like to broaden their business model to include the ability to rent out the property for these temporary special events. So a little bit of background, the applicant did initiate a text amendment to include temporary special events into the City of Waynesboro zoning ordinance back in 2022, last year. And that ordinance amendment was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission in December of last year and adopted by City Council in January of this year. The text amendment was really approved to permit short-term, smaller size, temporary special events occurring at more frequent intervals. So that is different from what was already permitted in the ordinance, which was larger, more infrequent events such as festivals or parades. That text amendment did allow for temporary special events of this kind of small, frequent nature to be permitted by a conditional use permit process in all zoning districts throughout the city. This is the property, just so everyone is familiar. The entrance you see here, you'll hear me describe later as the northern entrance, is where the applicant proposes that individuals would enter the property, and it's kind of a circular driveway or a half-circle driveway that would go out to that southern entrance. But this just provides context of the property and kind of the general nature of the property. This aerial view shows what surrounds the property. So the subject property is roughly 7 acres, and that is outlined in red. And you'll see it's just north of the Thurston Court neighborhood. You can see William Perry Elementary a little bit farther down to the south, and the Food Lion DMV complex, and then the Parkway Village apartments that are kind of to the north, offset a little bit on Hopeman Parkway. So in analyzing whether this conditional use permit is appropriate, staff looks to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan does designate this property actually for high-density residential, so much different than how it's currently being used. The zoning does allow temporary special events to be permitted in this zoning district, RG5, and it does identified that the use would be subject to additional requirements for any kind of temporary or permanent facility, structure, or signage. And I'll get into more details about this specific case as far as those permanent and/or temporary facilities are concerned. So the applicant is not proposing any kind of permanent structure with this use. They have identified the use of temporary structures and facilities, and so that word temporary is defined by building code to be structures that are installed for 179 days or less. The applicant would like to be able to use an outdoor event tent, so a 30 by 40 clear top tent, and that would be regulated by the fire department, and a permit inspection would be required. Another type of temporary facility that would be utilized would be temporary bathroom trailers, and the conditions that staff has stated would be that these bathroom trailers would need to be provided for events that have more than 25 people, and I'll show you in a minute kind of the concept layout, but they would be placed along the fence line kind of north of the tented event area, and I'll show you that in the concept. So according to the ordinance, it requires also that all temporary facilities, specifically those bathroom trailers, be 20 feet from any rear or side property line, that they be screened from view from the adjacent parcels in any street, and that they be removed from the property within 3 days of the end of an event. So this is a little bit difficult to see. I'll kind of point out that you can see that kind of northern entrance is where they would propose that people participating in the event would enter. The parking area is shown back against kind of the existing barn and behind the existing house. The estimated number of vehicles that could park there would be between 55 and 60. And then you can see kind of up on the northern area, they've noted some additional parking if needed as kind of an overflow, and the bathroom trailers are also located in that area with the event tent kind of close to the existing house. This is kind of hard to see. It's a really dark aerial, but it just kind of shows that general circulation of how cars would enter and park and exit the facility, and then where that tent and bathroom trailers would be located in relation to the house, and then some of the existing other structures that are already on the property. And this is just a little bit more of a zoomed in kind of concept that shows, where those bathroom trailers would be in relation to that shed and how they would plug into electricity, and also notes where some handicap parking could be provided. So as far as traffic is concerned, as I noted earlier, the property does have two entrances. The northern entrance would be used for the entrance, and the southern entrance would be used for vehicles to exit at the end of an event. Parking would be provided in that field with the barn on the western side, and it's estimated that that would be enough room for approximately 55 to 60 vehicles. There is an area identified for overflow parking if necessary. The applicant did note that signage would be placed to kind of direct traffic, along with having 1 to 2 parking attendants for their events. So emergency services, fire, and emergency management departments did review, and no concerns were identified with the specific request. The building official did note that at least one ADA accessible bathroom would need to be provided. So utilities, the subject property is served by a private well and septic. So the Virginia Department of Health reviewed the application, and they did provide some comments. This property has been used as a traditional bed and breakfast, and the Virginia Health Department did note that for that use, the applicant is required to obtain a tourist lodging permit, and the applicant wasn't aware of that requirement, and they're working towards compliance. The Virginia Department of Health talked through some of those specific issues regarding the well and septic, and determined that the property did have an adequate septic system for the number of bedrooms within the house, but a new or repaired well would be required in order to obtain a tourist lodging permit. With that being said, Virginia Department of Health does not regulate Airbnbs, so we're talking about traditional bed and breakfasts. They would not have any kind of regulation over the Airbnbs or VRBOs, that kind of use. And then also, Virginia Department of Health does not regulate events. We did reach out to them regarding this event, and they noted that they would recommend, obviously, having temporary bathroom facilities and water use during those events. So portable restroom trailers would be provided for events with more than 25 attendees, and at least one ADA accessible restroom would be provided at all events. And then another condition notes that potable water would be provided for events that may require drinking water or have other water needs. So another issue that comes up with the thought of having an event space or event use in maybe what is traditionally not a business-zoned area is any potential nuisance concerns. So any kind of impacts on neighboring properties related to noise, traffic. Staff does point out that there's quite a bit of mature vegetation that borders the western and southern boundaries of the property. And that's outlined here in yellow, so a nice stand of existing mature vegetation. The event venue areas are kind of all surrounding the main house, kind of clumped with that main use, and so they are pushed farther away from the property edges and boundaries. The location of events and the existing vegetative buffer really help to mitigate any potential negative impacts. In addition to that, some of the conditions that are recommended, and I believe were also discussed at your previous meeting, would be that to identify that the conditional use permit would be granted to the current owners of the property and would expire at the time the property is transferred to another owner. The events would be set up in general conformance to the submitted concept plans that shows the general layout. The attendance at events shall be limited to 100 invited guests, not to include staff or additional support workers brought in to assist with the event. The existing vegetative buffer around the property would need to remain in place. It has a good mix of evergreen and hardwoods, and that would remain. And then if any part of that buffer were to be removed, it would be replaced with similar vegetation. Condition recommends that events abide by the noise ordinance and that no events should start before 9 a.m. or end later than 11 p.m. So the applicant has noted, and staff certainly recognizes, that there's a demonstrated interest in and need for event venues in the region. They become increasingly popular in the area. And the subject property is somewhat unique in Waynesboro, that it is roughly 7 acres. It has a relatively private setting and kind of an historic home on the property. The temporary special events text amendment really was targeted specifically for businesses like this and kind of to diversify existing businesses, and it will drive additional business into Waynesboro and the surrounding region. Staff is recommending approval with the conditions as just noted, and the Planning Commission also recommended approval. I think, when Alisanne presented at the last meeting, they had some different recommendations on conditions, but with these changed conditions, actually a little bit maybe more strict than what they had recommended, the Planning Commission did recommend their approval. And this just lists the conditions that I've already reviewed, but if there are any questions on those, and this is a public hearing this evening. Questions?
Any questions? No?
Great job, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. I hereby open the public hearing. Mr. Hamp?
Oh, yes, ma'am. No one has signed up to speak, but I believe the applicant is present, and typically we offer the applicant the opportunity to speak. It's not necessary that they do.
He put
good?
you on the spot. You're more than welcome to speak, but you do not feel like you have to.
Well, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I think Leslie did a great job.
I think so, too.
And everything, I will tell you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from council? No? Okay. I hereby close the public hearing, and this ordinance was properly introduced, seconded, and discussed at the July 10th meeting, so I will call the question. All in favor of the ordinance approving the conditional use permit, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And it passes 4-0. Congratulations.
Good luck.
Okay, item 10 is to receive a viewer's report and consider introducing an ordinance closing and vacating approximately 6.77 acres of unimproved streets and alleys described as Ohio Street along Block 40, Lot 1, Ohio Street along Block 42, Lot 12, and North Augusta Avenue between Blocks 40, Lots 1 and 2, and Blocks 42, and Block 42, Lots 12 through 16, and 4 feet of Lot 17. Wow. Okay. Ms. Tate.
I know that's a mouthful, and we like to give the legal description, but I will just show you what that looks like on a map here. So this kind of T outline shows the request of the streets, the unimproved right-of-way that the applicant is requested to vacate. So the applicant, David Harner, president of Haley, Chisholm, and Morris Incorporated, is requesting the vacation in order to fence in the area. So they own the property that is outlined in red. So you can see that they own on either side of the area of which they're requesting the right-of-way vacation. They'd like to fence in the entire area that you see in red to store fencing and other materials related to their business. This just shows, I guess I'll show you here, you can see kind of right south of that red line is kind of a long rectangular building, and that's the building that you see to the right in this picture. So the area of right-of-way vacation would be kind of down that, in between the house, obviously, and that business structure, and then back, kind of spreading out in that horizontal T would be the area. So as it was included in your staff report, all 3 citizen viewers indicated that vacating these 2 sections of street right-of-way would not inconvenience the general public nor negatively affect the abutting landowners. Staff identifies that there would be no impact on the city's transportation network. The area does abut the railroad also, so no kind of ability for future connections to the north. There is a public sewer main that terminates in North Augusta Avenue prior to the portion requested to be vacated, and there's a public water line that extends into the vacation area, and the applicant has arranged to have that portion terminated. The applicant is the adjacent property owner. As shown here, they own those other lots that are not shown in blue, but are within that red outlined area. So as is the process in the city ordinance, if the land is determined to be in excess of $1,000, or less than $1,000, then a sale does not take place, and if approved, it would change hands. But if it's over $1,000, then the assessor kind of determines what the cost of that unimproved area would be. So the area of the proposed right-of-way vacation is 0.677 acres, or 29,494 square feet. The city assessor used the per square foot value of Block 40, Lot 1, which was $1.35 per square foot, to determine the assessed value of the proposed right-of-way, which has been identified at $39,817. Staff is recommending approval of the draft ordinance as shown on the proposed plat. And this would be scheduled for a public hearing at your meeting on August 28th. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. All right, so tonight we need a motion to introduce. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? Okay, this ordinance will receive final consideration at the August 28th regular meeting. Item 11 is to consider adopting a resolution of support for the application to the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, ma'am, members of council. I provided a proper staff report for this item, and we've discussed this at previous meetings. This is the loan application that we hope will involve some forgiveness from the state agency that provides the loan. If the forgiveness provision exists, we'll be undertaking about $9 million worth of repair and improvement at the wastewater treatment plant. If the forgiveness provision does not materialize, then we'll take those projects individually as we can afford to pay for them with operating revenue and fund balance. So, but for your consideration this evening is a resolution supporting our application for the loan.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, is there a motion to adopt the resolution of support for the city's application to the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund?
I'll make it.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 4-0. Item 12 is to consider adopting a resolution establishing a taxi cab rates of fare. Mr. Wilhelm.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. This resolution is the companion document for the changes to our city code that you approved tonight in the consent agenda. As I stated in my presentation at the last meeting, I compared 9 different localities in Virginia, their rates of fare based on mileage, put Waynesboro pretty much right in the middle of everything, and that is the rate we came up with. It has not been changed since 2008, so recommendation would be to approve this increase to make us more current.
And do we have any questions? No? Okay, so I'm going to say all in favor of adopting the resolution, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And the resolution passes 4-0. Item 13 is to consider a resolution adopting the fiscal year 2023 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan.
So
Ms. Tate.
we have done a briefing on this prior and also held a kind of a shorter presentation and public hearing prior. So I'm not going to try and gloss over it too quickly, but you all have heard this, and I'll kind of speak more towards the fact that the plan has been available for a 30-day public comment period. We have not received any written comments on the plan. I do know at your previous meeting during the public hearing, we did have some favorable input on, I guess specifically 2 or maybe all of the recommendations within the plan. So as noted, the entitlement program, the goal is accomplished through 3 national objectives, and that's to, in our case specifically, is to benefit low and moderate income persons. And the others are not something that we have focused on with this annual action plan, but can be eligible. This map shows areas that are qualifying for use of the Community Development Block Grant funds related to census tract and HUD data. Identified before what funds can be used for, the construction of public facilities and improvements, public services limited to a certain cap, relocation and demolition, rehabilitation of residential and non-residential structures, and the provision of assistance also to profit-motivated businesses if carrying out economic development or job creation and retention for low to moderate income persons. Kind of going through the schedule, we did some outreach meetings, kind of went out into the public to try and gather input on what activities citizens may want to see in this 2023 annual action plan. We have drafted the plan. The plan was available for a 30-day public comment period. We also held an official public hearing on the plan, and tonight we're asking for adoption of the fiscal year 2023 annual action plan. This annual action plan also reviews some substantial amendments from prior years. So in 2018, there's some unallocated funds that are being rolled over essentially into this annual action plan figure. Some leftover funds from Market Avenue parking lot improvement project from 2020. In 2021, there are some funds from an ineligibly identified Habitat for Humanity infrastructure project, some downtown resurgence grant, and then rather than reallocation, but some clarification of the Port Republic neighborhood projects, noting that signage and landscaping alone may not be eligible. And then 2022, some program income and also specific identification of Port Republic neighborhood revitalization projects. So the 3 projects that are identified in this annual action plan is a Rosenwald Community Center accessibility project, the LifeWorks project, the bread basket kind of food pantry, and then public services money to the warm homeless shelter assistance, as was previously discussed. So the funding amount related to the Rosenwald Community Center accessibility project would be just over $305,000. So installation of an elevator inside the building, interior and exterior ramps, and then ADA accessible street crossings across Port Republic at Fontaine Street, including those curb cuts and high visibility crosswalk markings. Depending on cost, this may be a multi-year project that would use funds from this year and future years, depending on what the specific work comes in at. The LifeWorks project, the funding amount would be just under $13,000, and the bread basket is a community food pantry meant to serve those that live in food deserts and those living with food insecurity. And then last would be obviously for the warm homeless shelter, an amount similar, or the exact same as the breadbasket, just under $13,000, which would be half of that 15% public services cap, to fund and support WARM's activities to provide emergency and temporary housing to homeless individuals. So the annual action plan was at all of these locations in hard copy and also on our website for the last 30 days. We have not received any specific written comment, although at your public hearing previously, there were positive comments related to the 3 separate activities identified in the plan. And so consideration tonight is to adopt the 2023 annual action plan.
Are there any questions for Ms. Tate? No? Okay. No questions? Do I have a motion to adopt the fiscal year 2023 CDBG Annual Action Plan?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries 4-0. Item 14 is communication, correspondence, and calendar. Mr. Ham?
Yes, ma'am, I have one item, and that is to alert the council to the fact that our work schedule, our workload lines up pretty helpfully to skip the August 14th meeting. Traditionally, the council has taken a one-meeting break over the summer, and it looks like while we've been fairly busy up to this point, and we can see some activity on the horizon, the 14th might be a good opportunity. So if the council's inclined to afford themselves and the staff a summer break, a motion to cancel the August 14th regular meeting would be in order.
We'll need to make a motion. Do I have a motion? We need to make a motion for that?
Yes,
And,
please.
okay, do I have a motion to cancel the regular business meeting of August 14th?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have canceled the next meeting until the August 27th, I believe. Okay, item 15 is citizen comment period. Do we have anyone signed up?
No one has signed up this evening.
Okay. Very good. Then that will bring us to item 16, and that's to conduct a closed session. Do I have a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move this meeting be recessed and that the City Council of Waynesboro immediately reconvene in a closed meeting for Code of Virginia 2.2-37113 to discuss or consider the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or of the disposition of publicly held real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of a public body, specifically Nature's Crossing Technology Center.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wood. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? Okay, this requires a roll call vote. Ms. Bortle?
Mayor Williams?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Councilman Allen? Councilman Lee?
Aye.
We are in closed session.
take long, did it?
Oh, okay, thank you.
You ready?
Yep. Is there a motion that we return to open session and certify the closed?
Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the following resolution. Whereas the City Council of Waynesboro has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this City Council that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of Waynesboro hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and two, only such business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the City Council of Waynesboro.
Thank you for that motion. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? Okay, this requires a roll call vote. Ms. Bortle?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood.
Aye.
Councilman Allen. Councilman Lee.
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Allen, would you do us the honor of making the motion to adjourn? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do I have a second?
You most certainly do have a second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.